That's going to be a presentation from our global PRRS technical manager, PH Raskin. And he's going to talk about successful implementation of new tools from the toolbox. And then in the 5-step process, we must implement these measures and then monitor our solution and identify, are we being successful or not? And we have 2 presentations there. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Duran Hernandez from Spain, a colleague from BI, talking about how sequencing will help us understand PRRS in Europe. And finally, on the program, we have Dr. Dennis Petrie from the United States talking about money in and out of your pocket. So how do we monitor the cost-benefit of our interventions? Okay, so we have a pretty intense ride today. We will have coffee at select periods and some food, but this is the program for today. So, are you ready? Are you steady? Let's talk about some goals. And you're probably wondering, these BI guys, PRRS, you just vaccinate and, if you have a good vaccine, why are we talking about 5-step process? Why make it so complicated, right? Well, I think when you break it down, PRRS control is pretty straightforward, right? There's 3 key things we need to do. We need to prevent infections, either new infections or resident viruses from flaring up. We have to maximize the immunity of the herd, different methodologies, and we should minimize exposure, stop bringing new virus in or reducing the load on the farm. It's pretty straightforward. What 20 plus years have taught us is that actually the theory is very straightforward, but actual implementation of these concepts in our real world is actually far from simple. And the 5-step process was developed now 14 years ago to start that systematic approach, thinking about the steps that it takes to properly implement our control measures. And I think many of us have done these things instinctively. And so you go, of course I do the 5-step process. The difference is not thinking about it, it's actually doing it. And hopefully I will start that process of thinking about it with you today. First question, do we need a process? Well, maybe at the end of this talk you will agree or disagree with me. I firmly believe the 5-step process ensures the successful implementation of your control measures. Where does this process come from? Well, this connection between the 5-step process and statistical process control and continuous process improvement was started by colleagues in BI. At that time I was in production system, thinking about how these methods that were invented or developed for manufacturing processes. So in the auto industry, these 2 guys started looking at the production process and breaking it down and analyzing it and doing a systematic process control. And this philosophy is what's behind the 5-step process. And it's basically a method that allows us to achieve a controlled process, a predictable process. We'll hear later on when Dennis presents that is actually crucial for the long-term sustainable success of our customers. You need to have a process that is in control, otherwise the unpredictability will make it very unlikely that you'll be successful. So how does that influence what we do? And I want to share a quote with you, and this really, I think, it's a quote that is very useful for understanding why the PRRScon project yesterday is so relevant. A bad system will beat a good person every time. And I think what we are trying to do is deal with a system, bad, good, difficult, and people. And the goal-setting process and the 5-step process are working in that interaction between the system, the farm, the production chain, and the people that work in it. Basically, what you see here is an explanation of kind of the history, the evolution of the 5-step process. And basically, in essence, what it is just a systematic approach that really was started when the scientific method was developed. So you ask a question, you do your research, you build a hypothesis, and then you test that hypothesis, conclusions, and report. And actually, when you see our technical presentations, we follow that order almost instinctively. That's our training, that's our background. The guys that did the continuous improvement process worked on similar principles, but looking now not at scientific facts, but at a production process. And we adapted that to our objective of controlling disease. We could use it for PRRS or for other complex diseases, so it's not just a tool for PRRS. And we will talk a little bit about these. The other thing that is important is that a lot of people think of the process as a linear thing. I start here and I end here. And all of us know life is never linear. It's always circular and maybe even more complex than that. And so it's important to understand that you never go only in one direction, and you'll see that in a second. So what I think it's really important at the beginning of a control program, and we do this instinctively, but I think it's good to do it systematically and maybe even write it down, is to identify the desired goals. Why is that critical? Because often what I as a veterinarian have as a goal on this farm, maybe it's to eradicate PRRS, or maybe it's sell more vaccine, or maybe it's to get rid of this guy quickly because I'm very busy, may not be the same goal that the farmer has. And if you don't discuss this up front, you will have a lot of problems in the long term, because you will have two different expectations of success and failure. And so start with some very simple questions. The farmer says, I want to control PRRS. Okay, that's good. If you put that as a goal, it's pretty difficult to measure success or failure against that. So maybe it's a more specific question. I want to minimize the risk of transmission in my herd between sows to the piglets. Or I want to eliminate the virus. I'm fed up every year, more costs. All of these questions are valid questions, and we can do these at the beginning of this process. The step 2 of the 5-step process is to determine the current status. And that is often not the second step, maybe it's the first step. We already know the status of the farm, and we are now trying to establish goals. But what I want to make clear here is that determination of the status can make a big difference of where you are and where you want to go. And knowing that correctly is an important part of what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Aaron Lowe will present sort of the diagnostic tools that we can use to determine the current status. The third step of the process, before I go there, is that I think you know this, PRRS is widespread in Europe. So we have a high prevalence of disease and really maybe not so high a prevalence of vaccination. Third step in the process is to understand the current constraints. And here is the reality of the farm. It's what we've always been talking about. Is on paper, everything is simple, make some rules on biosecurity, implement them, and we can walk away. But the reality is that we have farms that are not perfect, that have grown over time. We have systems that are not perfect. We have different diseases. We have people don't show up to work. We have all of these constraints. And understanding those gives us an opportunity to see what is the best program for this farm or this production system. The fourth step, and we'll hear about this today from Paul Rathken, is the development of the options, the solutions to control the problem. And the key here, I think, is that we understand that these need to be joint. It's no good that the veterinarian in the production system makes a decision, we are going to do this, without the buying and the belief and the support of the production team. It's the same with practitioners working with customers. You need to work together to develop these solutions. And then finally and importantly, you need to monitor those, implement them, and then monitor them to see, am I doing what I said I would do? And then is it giving me the results I expect? So let's, before I do that, just to remind you, in the website, PRRS.com, there is a very detailed description of the 5-step process and the tools that help you understand that. So if you get an opportunity, I recommend that you go there. So I'm now going to talk about the goal setting process. And the way I think about this is with simple questions. Let's ask questions. Going back to the scientific method, what do we want to understand? What do we want to achieve? And I'll go through these briefly with you. So first of all, I think it's really good to understand, because this doesn't start from zero, this is not a brand new farm, is what I have been doing working? And maybe the answer is yes, and then okay, see you next month. But typically, that's not the case. We wouldn't be called to the farm if things were working perfectly. So the second step would be, or the second question would be, okay, this is my reality. What can I do to improve what I'm doing today? So this would be a progressive step. Maybe what I'm doing is completely wrong. So would something else work better? Maybe you're quite happy with what your situation is. Maybe you're PRRS negative. And what's my level of risk today compared to yesterday? Am I getting less risky or more risky? And what do I need to do to evaluate and change that? You may have set some goals. You know, some farms or some systems are very mission or goal-oriented. But where am I going? Am I going in the right direction or the wrong direction? And this is typical questions that we do at the beginning of this process. And this is probably not a person that's that well known in Europe, but Yogi Berra is like a philosopher of life, but he's actually a former New York Yankees baseball player, and he said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And I think it's actually, like most of Yogi Berra's saying, one of these obvious truths, right? But perhaps where we're going is not PRRS. And this is one of the first steps you need to, as a veterinarian, decide is are we focusing on the right target? But, you know, I think in most of our farms today, PRRS is, without doubt, the most important disease, but not everywhere. And so I think it is important to also not forget, when we are so focused on PRRS, that there's many other diseases or complex interactions of disease and management that could be more relevant. So pick your target correctly when you start. The other key question that is important to pose very early in the process is okay, do I want to live with PRRS or do I want to get rid of this problem forever? And that's a really crucial decision. So control or elimination. And I think you are the best people to judge that. I think the importance here with this decision is that it's actually quite difficult to take if you haven't done steps 2 and 3. So the goals start getting a little bit more complicated to establish when you want to consider this decision. And I was introduced to this by my colleague Dale Paulson in 2003, and ever since we've used this a lot. And it's one of these charts when you first look at it, you go, oh my goodness, I'm going to get lost, I'm going to get Paulsonized, but it's actually very simple. And the key thing is maybe to follow it logically. So we start here. You have 2 basic status on your farm. You could be PRRS naive or negative, and then it's pretty clear. Your world is all around prevention of infection. You must maintain that status at all costs. But that sometimes doesn't work. You get exposure from a new virus introduction, and then you go to this PRRS positive status. And there your goal must be to stabilize. You have to start by reducing the active circulation of virus, particularly in the breeding herd. And that is the first process. You cannot go to elimination without stability first. And I think, again, this simple concept made a huge difference, because we had people in our production system that were getting killed with PRRS abortions and wanted to eliminate the virus tomorrow. And you cannot do it that way. It's a process where you first stabilize the farm, and then you can consider elimination. The other key thing when you're setting goals with your customers is we've got to manage expectations. We've got to be realistic. We've got to analyze the situation, the reality of the farm, and then establish the goals based on that reality. It's not helpful for anyone to create an unrealistic expectation. So in a farm, in a highly dense area of production surrounded by positive farms, and you're a farrow-to-finish farm and you want to go for eradication, a strong dose of reality needs to be implemented. And that's our job when we're setting the goals. And so this chart is a useful way of looking at that based on your internal and external biosecurity risk factors. So again, you probably should have done a PADRAP assessment or some sort of biosecurity assessment before you set your goals. Or maybe you adapt your goals based on your evaluation of your biosecurity. But let's use an example here where you have very low risk of external introduction of virus. You're located in the mountains somewhere, no other farms near you, negative gills, negative semen. You have a pretty good chance of being in this elimination segment. But if you are in the middle of, yay there, and you have 10,000 pig farms within a 5-kilometer radius, I'm exaggerating a little bit, then maybe your external risks are so high that the probability of an eradication is low. It doesn't mean it's not there, just you have to set the right expectation. Okay? And this simple chart is quite useful when you're having that conversation with your customer. The other thing that is critical when we are goal setting is this urgency question. So people want to do something when they're feeling intense pain. And typically, our customers and ourselves react very much to the PRRS outbreak. Why? Because we get a phone call, there was 5 abortions this morning, pigs are dying like crazy in the farrowing house, and we act. Let's eliminate the virus, or let's do something. And really, what's very clear, more and more clear, is that while these are obviously immensely painful to the morale of the farm, to the cost of production, to vets' stress levels, what really tends to cost more money is this less visible PRRS. And this is quite frequently following an acute outbreak. This is an example from the United States. It's a production system that monitors the percent of pigs that reach the grade A, the optimal weight. And what they found on this farm is that when you track this over time with SPC charts, there's a clear impact following a PRRS outbreak where instead of 91% of your pigs being in that optimal weight range, quality range, only 85% of them. And you do that over a period of 6, 7, 8 months, it's a huge drain on the profitability of that farm. We'll hear a little bit more about that later on in our implementation section with Dennis. But I think that's one thing that in Europe we struggle with. We are very good at dealing with individual outbreaks, but this chronic, low-level, big economic loss is sometimes missed by our production systems. The other critical thing that I want to tell you with goals is that it's no good either if you're in an integrated production system or in a farrow-to-finish system to think about only one part of the farm. I think in the past with PRRS we focus way too much on protecting the sow against abortions. That's been our focus in Europe. And we've kind of forgotten about all these pigs over here that are posing a huge risk, not only economic, but also for destabilizing your breeding herd. So this particular arrow, I think, is often forgotten. If we have well-immunized, well-vaccinated sow herds, but we have rampant circulation of PRRS virus in our growing population, we are constantly risking a new virus or virus overwhelming our immunity. And so let's think about the whole herd. And during our talks, both on the diagnostic side and on the control side, we'll use this concept of the prevention chain. The other thing that counters what I said, while we need to think about the whole herd, we've got to start with breeding herd stability. If you do not do that, you will learn very quickly that some of your interventions will not work as you expect. And this is data that will be published, I believe, on the 1st of October in the Porcine Health Management, a trial that was done during our registration process in Spain, a field experience where 4-week-old pigs were vaccinated in a normal commercial setting. So this is not a challenge study, this is the real world, when the farm was investigated, the outbreaks were happening typically around 8 to 10 weeks of age on this farm. So it was going to be perfect to vaccinate at 4 weeks and then have time for the vaccine to immunize. Well, as things happen when you do field trials, this farm, as the trial started, was experiencing a very large virus circulation in the breeding herd. So in the first batch of this program, a third of the pigs were PRRS positive by PCR at vaccination already. And so let's be realistic. It's not possible for the vaccine to prevent infection when the pigs are already infected. And so very, very important that we start the right way. Subsequent batches where the proportion of PRRS pigs was lower were successful. And this is important when you start a program on a farm, you're all pumped up, I've been convinced by BI, I've got to vaccinate the piglets, it's critical, and then that happens on the first batch, and the farmer goes, you sold me a real dummy. I've been vaccinating pigs, and look what I got. My feed conversion and my growth rate is worse than it was before. Very important to set the right starting point. Now, I think what we need to also be is realistic on our ambition, our commitment to this program. And as your commitment and your ambition grows, the complexity of the goal grows. And so just use these as some examples. So I want to reduce the number of abortions and outbreaks in sows. Okay, that's your goal. Let's work on that objective. But maybe you want to take it a few levels deeper. And this is what this graph or image is trying to show, is that as you get more complicated, you are also being more ambitious in your achievements. Okay, and perhaps the last one would be, I want to be long-term profitable in my system with an effective pest control policy. This is an example of kind of a standard template program for what I think is the reality on many of our farms. The farmer doesn't want too much complexity. He's maybe not a huge drama on the farm. He's losing money due to PRRS, but it's not the end of the world. And so this farmer wants to focus on performance, clinical signs reduction, and keeping a predictable status. So his objective is to stabilize that farm. That's absolutely fine. So you talk to the farmer, I want to maintain a stable, positive population in my breeding stock, and I want to reduce the circulation in the herd so that I don't have a lot of virus going from the sows to the piglets. Okay, that's a perfectly achievable and valid goal, which is very realistic. What you take from there is adding complexity, adding chances of huge success, but also risk of failure. This is an example of a farm that was very concerned about the abortion rate. They had periodic outbreaks of PRRS. And you can see these. This is a graphic showing abortions per 1,000 animals. You can see massive spikes in the weekly abortion rate. They were using a 660 program, and they were not happy. They implemented a mass vaccination program, and the abortions didn't go away, but the reduction was very, very significantly by just making that change. And then they understood that there was a strong seasonal component in this system, and they tried to time then their mass vaccination to fit best with the situation on the farm, and they got an even further improvement. So they had a very clear goal, they did an intervention, and then they measured whether they were successful or not. We have some colleagues here in the room and some customers already doing 5-step process programs, and I just want to share with you a few examples. This is a French case, farm in Brittany, that in discussions with the vet and the production, the owner of the farm, they decided, okay, I want to look at 3 different areas. I want to look at my PRRS status. I want to have negative piglets at weaning by controlling and stabilizing circulation in the sow herd. Okay? I'm really worried about abortions on this farm, and my farrowing rate is not where it used to be. So I want to stabilize that at around 90%. I don't like having diarrhea in the farrowing house, and I have too much diarrhea post-weaning. And then I, of course, want to get some production benefits from this intervention. I want to reduce my mortality in the farrowing house and have heavier pigs at weaning. Great. This is on a 600 sow farm, farrow to finish, a set of realistic goals that you can work to. The complicated thing is then to obviously achieve them, but at least there's a very clear expectation of what we're going to do. You can increase the complexity by looking now at a system. This is data from Gordon Spronk, working with the Pipestone system in Minnesota. They basically said, we want to wean PRRS-negative pigs all the time. Consistently, that is our goal. Wean PRRS-negative piglets at weaning. Great. That's a very clear, simple goal. They've been working at that goal for, I don't know, probably 10 years. And these are some of the steps that they implemented to reach that goal. So a simple goal doesn't necessarily mean that the steps to get there are that simple. They are filtering all their breeding herds. They have implemented strict biosecurity protocols that involve training, testing, and auditing. They have standardized load close, homogenized, or eliminate exposed programs, and they have started strategic vaccination. So they have made all of these interventions with this one goal in mind. And this is just an example of how they measure that. The level 5 active is the worst PRRS status you can have. Basically, you're weaning PRRS-positive pigs all the time. And this is the level of intervention. So it's really a long-term process to achieve that goal that they set in their system. Okay. Different experience. This is a project that has been organized and run in southeast Iowa by a group of producers, so 40 producers, 400 sites, and over 1 million pigs. And here the goals have to be different, right? This is a highly dense, highly positive population, slightly different to maybe Minnesota. And the veterinarians in the production system there sat down and said, okay, what do we want to achieve here? Elimination? No, absolutely no way, not realistic, we won't go there. They set some, I think, pretty realistic goals. They said, okay, we would like to increase the awareness of PRRS and what it costs us within those production systems. Then we want to improve communication. So we want to talk between us about what's happening. I had an outbreak last week. I'm moving pigs from this side to this side, and they're PRRS positive. Watch out. And thirdly, a little bit as a consequence of the first two goals, they wanted to reduce the frequency and severity of PRRS outbreaks. So they didn't want to not have PRRS. They wanted to live with PRRS within a realistic, sustainable way. And they did that through reducing the number of new strains that come into this area, and then reducing the shedding in the piglet population by, in this case, vaccination. Very simple goals, big, huge project. Jim Lowe presented to us at a previous perspective with the systems that he works. He has a very, I think, very holistic goal, and the goal is to produce pigs from breeding herds that are not infected for the greatest amount of time, and then hence with the greatest amount of profit potential. So again, they are looking very clearly at weaning negative pigs as much as possible, and then making the most of those pigs by keeping them from getting infected. Simple goal, complicated process. And it's kind of a little bit, if he was here, he'd probably be embarrassed. You know, Jim Lowe, Michelangelo in the same sentence almost. That's kind of embarrassing. But he said it very well. The greater danger for most of us isn't that our aim is too high and we miss, but that it's too low and we reach it. So I think while I'm saying realistic goals are important, they also have to be aspirational. You know, you have to want to get better. Otherwise, it's very hard to motivate people. And we'll hear a little bit about that in our constraints section, where we talk about how people can be motivated to do a better job with these complex programs. So what is our goal in BI? So we're talking about you setting goals, but we have set goals too. And I think our goals are very obvious at this meeting, I hope. Our goals are to reduce the impact of PRRS in Europe by applying a comprehensive whole herd PRRS control plan. We start here by increasing our knowledge, sharing knowledge discussing with colleagues, exchanging ideas. We want the 5-step process to become routine. We are convinced that in Europe we need to make huge improvements in our biosecurity. We still have too many positive boar studs, we have too many positive gilts being moved to farms, and we want to help with that. We want to increase the piglet vaccination rate. We believe firmly that that's a key part of the solution in Europe. And we want mass vaccination of sows in the breeding herd to be a standard practice. And the achievement is that we have a 1.5 billion pot of money of the cost of PRRS in Europe. So it's a big target. Again, you may have seen this before. We estimate that there's 180 million unprotected piglets in Europe. These are essentially huge opportunities for the virus to multiply and spread. That was the situation in August 2015. The good news is that in August 2016, we believe, based on our numbers, that there's now only 167 million unprotected pigs in Europe. Plenty of opportunities for improvement, but also a huge impact. And I think the message around piglet, the importance of piglet protection is critical. Finally, if you are brave and you have a very committed customer, maybe your goal is elimination. And I think it's a worthy goal. I was very fortunate to successfully eliminate PRRS from our multiplication system in the States, and it was a really great feeling to achieve that for the team. And I think it should be, for many of us, the aspiration. But really, the complexity and the ambition grows as we expand our area of concern. So a farm elimination is relatively easy. I think with the load close exposed programs, we've achieved that pretty consistently around the world. When you start growing that to a system or a region or a country, the success rate really becomes much, much lower. So I think we need to also be realistic about that. We talk about area regional control. The elimination part of that is really an aspiration that is not short term. Why is this a very tough decision to make? Unfortunately, the cost, the risk of going negative has some strong economic implications. This is data from the US. I'd love to have data from Europe, and maybe that's a project for future PRRS awards. This is data from the United States, but it shows very clearly that when you are naive and you have a new virus introduction, the cost per sow is much, much higher than if you have an immunized or previously exposed herd. I don't think that's a surprise to you, but the numbers are very helpful because then you can actually quantify your risk aversion if you want. Okay? And the other critical thing I want to say on elimination is that actually to set that goal, you really have to do steps 2 and 3 of the process. And these 2 steps are critical. So you need to understand where you are today, your current status, and you need to understand the constraints of your system. So is my sow herd stable to start with? Have I reduced the virus circulation? That's pretty critical. Am I weaning PRRS negative pigs? And Erin will explain to us the best way to measure that. Is my circulation actually in the growing pigs? And that's where the fire is burning. What is my biosecurity status? Have I done a good PADRAP or a biocheck risk analysis? What's my virological status? Do I have 3 viruses circulating in my herd or just 1? And how many new virus introductions do I have? If you're introducing viruses every week, the chances of a successful elimination are probably 0. And then what is my real life farm situation? Am I surrounded by positive pigs? Am I in a single site production system? That's going to create much higher difficulty to eliminate the virus in my view. How's the cash flow? There is an economic analysis you have to do if you're depopulating parts of the farm, if you're intervening with costly changes in your management or interventions. And then can I buy PRRS negative stock to repopulate my farm or to flow my farm? And these questions are really pretty critical. We do have some successes, and I want to share with you an experience from PRRS and colleagues from Denmark at a small area, the Horn Peninsula in Denmark, where they decided to work together with the farmers and the local practice, to attempt a regional elimination of PRRS in this very well-defined geographical area. And so they started with the status of basically everything positive for PRRS, maybe stable, but with PRRS-positive pigs. And over a 2-year period, after doing a load-close homogenized program and a pretty convoluted and long program, which I don't have time to share with you, they are now in a situation where that whole area is PRRS negative. And this will be published. It's currently submitted for review. But I think it's important that you realize that this group of veterinarians and producers sat down and really articulated a clear direction for the program. They defined right at the beginning where we want to be and how we want to do this. They created very detailed timelines with kind of lines in the sand where things needed to happen. And then they also defined the expectations. You know, we need to be successful, because for us to be financially successful, we need PRRS-negative pigs. The premium in Denmark for selling PRRS-negative pigs is huge, and so the motivation was also very high. Okay? So after all of this talk, and goal setting can be kind of a little bit fluffy, I just want you to remember a quote from Pablo Picasso, and I never thought Pablo Picasso was so eloquent with his words, but our goals can only be reached through a vehicle of a plan in which we must fervently believe and upon which we must vigorously act. There is no other route to success. So I leave you with that. If you don't remember anything, just remember a nice picture of a sow from Pablo Picasso. Thank you for your attention, and I think we have time for maybe one question now.